I've always been known as someone with a diverse group of friends. I also love Latin American culture, which is why I graduated with a minor in Spanish. For most of my life, I've never thought in terms of race. I used to say it's stupid to be proud of your race because that's not something you've accomplished, it's just something you're born with. However, as I see other races continue to tribe up while I become a minority in the nation of my ancestors, it's made me reflect on this mentality. I come from a heritage American family that never owned slaves and fought in the Revolutionary War, World War I, and World War II. I know where my ancestors from the 1740s are buried in Pennsylvania. They were the original founders. So as someone with this legacy, that gives me authority to speak out against American leaders who maintain a policy of mass migration. I like the diversity of nations. Diversity is our strength, but diversity requires separation or else it no longer exists. If everyone can be German, everyone can be Irish, everyone can be British, then no one will be. That's not to say that only the indigenous Europeans can live in their countries, but they need to consist as the core of those populations. Same goes for European-built America. Now, I'm still going to give my black friends their own fiefdoms once we retake the country, but the core of our aristocracy and the core of this country is going to be those with European descent. I call this heritage nationalism, or it's not quite white nationalism because I'm not advocating for everyone to be white in countries built by Europeans, just the core majority. What's funny is I've noticed the majority of people who disagree and get offended by this are those who don't plan to have children, and most of them are white. Which is exactly why we need to cultivate a white racial consciousness again, because I'm starting to get the anti-white thing, just a little bit. When I see how easily white people have been fooled into hating their race, how they've been fooled into cursing some cruel, ambiguous ancestor that they don't even know the name of, and how quick to anger they can be at anyone who advocates a white racial consciousness. Now, I know the counter argument is America represents a melting pot. But how am I supposed to take this term seriously when it didn't enter the American lexicon until 1908 by Israel Zangwill, who was born in Britain? Let's take a poll. Which America would you rather raise children in? 90s Disney or current Disney? What do you think the result of this poll would be if we asked every American? I'd be willing to bet that even if America is minority white, 90s America would still win this poll. Those who advocate for this message, I think I speak for many of them when I say we want a nation state instead of an international order. The powers that be right now, however, they want nations to be arbitrary so they can have internationalism. The powers that be are like decadent Persia, and the heritage nationalists are like Sparta. And the only way we can have a Sparta that works is if the majority of American Sparta consists of heritage Americans. If we cease to be the ones calling the shots, then this achieves the agenda of the internationalists. Now, I also know that the counter argument to this is heritage Americans are not having enough children to keep the economy going. Well, quite frankly, America can survive a lower GDP from a smaller population. What we cannot survive is having our nation flooded by illegal immigrants from the third world who have never lived in a modern society. We have extremely complex systems in America that cannot facilitate an exponential growth of people who are not experienced in operating those systems. So this third world immigration trajectory we're on is bad for everyone, regardless of race. Even the black progressive mayor of New York City is telling Biden we cannot handle any more immigrants. I'm also seeing a lot of hatred for my people, and ironically enough, I would have never developed a European racial consciousness if it wasn't for the anti-white people. The anti-white racists in positions of power are waking up more Europeans than I ever could. Take, for example, the mayor of Boston, who accidentally sent out an email saying she was throwing a no whites Christmas party, which I don't care, I think it's funny, but if that's how it's gonna be, then whites need to have identity politics too. A minority of you may think I'm bad, but I would never think to unironically throw a party that excludes another race. As I record this, my girlfriend put on Home Alone. I just overheard a line from a kid saying, "No one would break into our house. We live in the most boring, safest street in America." For context, their house was set in Chicago. Can we say that about Chicago today? This is what I'm talking about. In 2002, Harvard Magazine advocated for abolishing the white race and nothing happened. In 2023, Harvard is under investigation by the Department of Education for anti-Semitism because the president didn't condemn Palestine supporters hard enough. In Dublin, there were predictably protests when children were stabbed to death on their way to school by an Arab immigrant for being white. The media labeled the protesters far right. They called the protesters barbaric, but not the murderer. Norway is too white, according to the president of the Jewish community in Oslo. I could do this all day, but I won't because I don't want to sound like a broken record. Just look into a crystal ball and envision where this will lead in 100 years at the current trajectory. The current trajectory of European stocks saying, this is fine, while the house is burning. Now notice I only use examples of people in power who are anti-white. You may be a white person who doesn't hate people from other races, but there are a lot of, and you shouldn't, but there are a lot of people in power who hate you for being white. Yet I challenge you to find one single white person in a position of power who says they want to abolish another race. Like the New York Times journalist who was caught with a countdown clock on when America will be minority white, which I'm looking forward to, and I'll explain why at the end of this video. There's people in power who wake up in the morning and work towards abolishing whiteness. According to New York Republican Representative Elise Stefanik, liberal Harvard students protesting the war in Gaza constitutes Jewish genocide. They dragged Harvard's black lesbian president to Congress for not clamping down harder on students who show solidarity for Palestine. Yet Harvard Magazine published an article saying abolishing the white race is so desirable that some may find it hard to believe that anyone except white supremacists would oppose it. Nothing happened to them. And the only thing enablers of this can argue is, well, white people deserve it. Because you can no longer argue that white people are the ones in power in America in 2023. And this transition of power in America really wouldn't be as bad if nobody else was tribal. However, other people are going to continue to be tribal because they were never coerced into not having in-group preference. So in conclusion, a mass white consciousness awakening is inevitable because the white people who never reach this awakening are all going to die out. And the white people who are left are going to return to their natural human instinct of survival. So if you're white, the question is, are you going to develop a white racial consciousness, or will you be confused by the young future white generations who will make this mainstream? The good news is we can still fix this. Illegal immigrants can be turned away, detained, and deported easily. That's not the challenge. The primary objective is to depose the elite class and decision makers in white countries that deliberately maintain a policy of mass migration. Right now, white people in Western civilization actually do have more power than they do. The only issue is we're not as collectivized. Like this tweet perfectly explains, with every single ethnic group voting en masse for politicians that will benefit their group, whites remain alone. We're alone in that we entirely separate into Republican and Democrat with no care for the success of our people. The only people who don't play identity politics as a whole are whites. Then we wonder why we are becoming a minority in the country and have absolutely no unity. We are the stronger force, make no mistake, and the elites are scared of us. That's why they don't want us to have racial solidarity. All we have to do is actually care, which was hard for me to do. I have not historically cared about these things. It wasn't long ago I told a Republican friend, I don't care that a migrant caravan is entering the country. From what I can recall, I started to care for 3 reasons. 1, it clicked with me how much mass migration will damage the country. 2, I found out how many in power are anti-white. And 3, I want to make a better world for future generations. As someone who doesn't instinctively think about race, it took me a long time to realize how many people are anti-white because they falsely believe my ancestors hurt their ancestors. For those people, at least you can say they care about their ancestors. One cool thing I learned about Europeans is we can eat a lot of dairy and not get sick. Most other races struggle to digest dairy, especially raw milk. However, I had raw goat milk once and it gave me a natural high. I'm not joking. I feel bad other races can't experience this as much without getting sick. I think this is why raw milk became illegal, because it activates white people's ancestral blood memory. Also, out of Africa theory has been debunked by the mainstream, so I think white people most likely come from Hyperborea. I also feel way less nihilistic since I started gaining a racial consciousness. It makes you realize you come from a line of people who built something and you're continuing their work. We're all working together to make a better world for our children. There's a direct correlation between the rise of nihilism in the modern world and an unprecedented level of disconnect from our ancestors. Now, let me have this other person explain why it's actually going to be a good thing when whites become the minority in America.
The left has vilified whites And as a consequence, the left does not want whites to exist as a group. I mean, they are in favor of them having they want to be whatever they are, whatever indigenous group, whatever their native country is. And they want to organize on the basis that they're all not white, and black is beautiful, and Hispanics have a rich culture, and blah, blah, blah. They don't want whites to feel pride. They don't want whites to feel distinct or distinguished or anything like that. And that's fine. But that's why the right-wing answer to all of this is to assert, contra that, okay, you have your not white holiday party, we're going to have a white holiday party. We're going to celebrate our culture. You want a nation where every group is just a minority? Well, be careful what you wish for. Because the day that whites become a minority in America, a lot of people think this means the ascendancy of the non-white American or a non-white America. On the contrary, the day that whites become a minority, they become the largest and probably the most successful minority group in the United States of America. So some people think this is going to be a triumph. That's the day that America goes from having a beleaguered, defeated white majority that has lost dominance to having a very powerful, very wealthy, and racially self-aware and the largest minority group, and it's going to be white. I think that's maybe the last thing that they want. And that's not a cult. That's not to say, hey, maybe it's a good thing. But it is to say that there is sort of an irony here that as America becomes less white, white people become more white. That may sound like the dumbest thing ever. But as America has fewer white people in it relatively, the more white people become conscious of their whiteness.
So this breaking news just occurred while I was making this video. House approves resolution demanding MIT Harvard presidents resign after anti-Semitism testimony. Representative Elise Stefanik called the resolution's passage a historic bipartisan effort, which is a lie, because whenever there's anything in Congress that involves Israel, the Republicans and the Democrats, they put all their differences aside and they always vote bipartisan. So what's historic about this? This is just a normal day in Congress where they're all like, hey, is this the one thing we all agree on? Yeah, because, these are the people that tell us what to do. So yeah, everyone except Thomas Massie, he's the only seemingly patriot in Congress. And let me just be clear. Let me just read this from the Nomad Soul. Instead of just branding everyone who speaks about this unveiling conspiracy as being anti-Semitic, Jewish people have the greatest obligation to really uncover the truth about this, as they are the ones facing retribution because of the Zionist infiltration and ideology. Right. Anyone with enough sense knows that not all Jewish people are a part of the cabal. And when I use the word Zionism, I mean Jewish supremacy. I think that, they can have their own country, whatever. That's not how I interpret this word. Zionism is an issue when it's people who have racial supremacist ideas who are in positions of power. That's when it's a problem. And I think pretty much everyone can agree on that. And that's really the core of what I'm pointing out here when it comes to this still sensitive topic. And understandable. And it's like, I actually live in a highly Jewish area, so I've talked to people from this background. A lot of times I don't reveal my power level, but I've heard them say things like, it's ridiculous that they think every Jewish person is in the cabal. Like, where's my money then? How come they don't give me a paycheck? And it's like, dude, you're a layman. You're nobody. I don't mean that in a disparaging way. It's just like, you're obviously not part of like the group of people that people are mad at in this country. They think very collectively, which in a way it can be kind of good, because I mean, what is this video? I'm advocating for us to think more collectively, and they're thinking more collectively. So in a way, it's like, I get it. But sometimes I think some of them take it a little bit too far, where whenever you criticize, let's say, Israel or the Zionist control of America, they think that they're being personally attacked, and that's understandable. If I grew up in their position with people telling me about their historic past, I would probably feel the same way they do. So it totally makes sense why they have this knee-jerk reaction. So that's kind of why we have to be patient and explain this to people slowly. And just because you've been aware of this thing for years, this is still brand new information to other people. And you got to be patient. So yeah, in conclusion, I'm just going to give you a quick little synopsis of what I think the future will entail. Again, I know I've done this in other videos, but it seems like a bifurcation is sort of going to occur where white people who are Christian patriots, they no longer seem to be able to get in through the Ivy League university, which is the pipeline to the elite in this country. Like every elite person you see at the top of banking, the government, big tech, they all come from the Ivy League schools, which there's 8 of them in America. And they have a culture right now where they're anti-white and they filter out any people who criticize Israel. So because of that, you can't be a total 100% patriot, America first, and graduate through the Ivy Leagues these days, unless you hold your tongue and somehow are able to infiltrate, which really doesn't work realistically. I feel like people have these ideas in their head, like, I'm just going to infiltrate the system. Like, once people get into the system and they start getting paid the money that the system can provide, they never speak out. Infiltration doesn't work. So this is a major problem for our guys, for America Firsters. I mean, you got to hand it to them. They really pulled it off. Oh man, here's a good quote. Every time anyone says that Israel is our only friend in the Middle East, I can't help but think that before Israel, we had no enemies in the Middle East. Yes, and this is exactly the point I'm trying to make to people, especially in the older generation who's sort of more new to these ideas. And I don't say that disparagingly, but I actually brought this up to my mom, who is definitely not someone who's familiar with these things. And this line actually made her understand. She's like, oh, she's like, wow, I never thought of it like that before. Like, this line actually does get through to a lot of people because you can't dispute it. If you look back at history, how do you dispute this line? We seriously had no enemies in the Middle East until this happened, until we started backing up Israel. It's a fact. Like, what, are you going to go back to the Crusades and say they were our enemies back then? So yeah, I think an aristocracy in America is inevitable once a bifurcation occurs. Once white people are like, wow, we can't even play within the system anymore since our pipeline to the elite has been completely shut off. And that's the Ivy League institutions. So I think white people are kind of going to start to look like a mob, like a mafia, once we become the minority. Where before, historically, the mafia in America has been the Italians or the Irish. I think it's just going to all lump in together, just white people. And we're going to have to create our own systems, since we're, like I said, we're barred now. We can't play the game anymore.
And again, just to be clear, I mean white people that will put America first are barred. Of course, the white people who are shills for Israel, some of them can still filter through.
So here's an academic article from the Oxford Journal, Making Aristocracy Work. Aristocracy's functionality is dependent on the amount of value given to it and the regard for one's survival. So as the mainstream systems fail, like the mainstream media and the government, we're already seeing this happen, as that starts to break down, there will be a power vacuum and then another system will rise up. This isn't anything special. We've seen this happen 1,000 times throughout history. It's basically an inevitable cycle, and it's going to occur in America soon. We can already read the tea leaves and see it happening. And this new system is going to be predominantly white, and it's going to be based around an aristocracy. And this might sound sort of goofy to some people, but I explain in more detail how this will come about in other videos. Like in America First, aristocracy is inevitable, and I have another video like the rise of the quote-unquote far right after World War III. If you want more information on that, check out those videos. Here's a good tweet. So Europeans built the most advanced civilization in history, and then one day just started paying non-Europeans to move into all the countries they built and demographically replace them because not doing so is racist or something. Totally natural. Yeah, I've seen Robert Seffer on Twitter talk about this too. He's like, yeah, none of this is natural. You realize that, right? People think that like, oh, it's just people have lost their way. These gosh darn Democrats, they're just so naive. It's like, nah, if they were naive, they wouldn't be this efficient at replacing the population so quickly. This is designed. But I'm sure the majority of you listening already know this, so I'm preaching to the choir. So I'm just going to stop right here. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you for listening. Take care.